All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to episode 2 of our Candid series. Last week, we talked about how Christians should respond, should act during a crisis. And we're going to continue with that discussion tonight, but we're also going to be addressing conspiracy theories. Now, I don't know about you, but I've gotten plenty of conspiracy theories messaged to me, posted on my Facebook, emailed to me, and a lot of them were Christians. So we're going to talk about whether or not that is something that we really should be delving into. So without further ado, I'm going to bring in Robert and Bill, and we're going to talk about it. Bill, Robert, how you doing?
Doing good, brother.
Doing very well, thank you.
All right, let's get back into it tonight. So, Christians in crisis. Last week we kind of left off on, well, if we're afraid, does that mean that we don't have enough faith in Jesus? Well, let's start with that.
Robert, I'll let you take off with that one, and I'll chime.
I think the answer for me is no. That doesn't talk about my faith level. You know, I'm a human being, and sometimes, believe it or not, I get afraid. And I'm not really ashamed of that. I mean, younger man I was, but now I'm not, because guess what? It doesn't speak about whether or not I have faith in the Lord. I can still have faith and still feel some fear. I got to think when Daniel went into that lion's den and they rolled back that door, after that first growl, I think he felt some fear, and he's a human being. He should have. So I don't think it really speaks to whether or not I have faith in the Lord. As we know with the story of Daniel, it ultimately turned out just to be another night, probably like a night like no other, but I mean, the Lord saw him through, so fear is okay to have, I think, but we still have to have faith in the Lord.
Yeah, I would agree with Robert. You know, the psalmist said, when I am afraid, okay, so he's affirming that he has been afraid in the past and probably will be afraid in the future, but then his action is, I will trust in you. So when we feel fear, and I will tell you there is no human who has ever walked this earth that has never felt fear in one way, shape, or form. It's all about what happens and what does that cause us to do. Does it cause us to fight, flight, or freeze? Or does it cause us to go to the Lord and say, I can't handle this. I am frightened. I'm afraid. And I need your help. And once again, you know, I love how Christ reacted when Peter went under the water. Peter was obviously very fearful, and no lengthy prayers there. Lord, save me, 3 words. And immediately Christ reached out his hand and helped him. So the fact that we're a Christian and we are having fears just means that we're human.
Exactly.
So, I get what you're saying about how being human we feel fear, but I wonder why is there that stigma that that if you're afraid then you're not having enough faith? Where does that come from? Why on earth is that mindset prevalent within circles of faith? Why do you guys think that?
Bill, you're going to have to take that first, because I got to think about that.
You know, I think we're all at different levels, and so many times we don't want to admit that we're human. We don't want to admit that we're sinful. We don't want to admit that we're fallible. And so when you have different Christians come together and one person is brave enough to admit, you know, I'm really fearful, I'm afraid. Many other times other Christians will say, well, I don't want to appear to be weak, you know, because weak is in the human perspective is not good. In God's world, weakness is really pretty a good thing. You know, Paul says, when I'm weak, then I'm strong. But I think in many situations, it's one of those things that we want to project that we are, that we have a strong relationship with Christ, that we are in control. And in many times, people will say, "Well, all you have to do is have more faith." When in fact, they at some point in time have either gone through fear or are going through fear at that time. They're just afraid to admit it.
Yeah, I think, brother, one of the things I kind of picked up on what you're saying is that we actually punish people who are honest enough to say they're fearful. And it's really an embarrassing part of being a Christian, because our humanness is, it's just part of who we are, and we can't separate ourselves from it. And I think if we are fearful and not admit it, we can't kind of cope with it, deal with it. So we kind of stuff it down. I can remember when I was a kid, my dad would say to us, "Big boys don't cry." And it was a signal that said, hey, if you're fearful or you're feeling some pain, don't let me know about it, and don't let anybody else know about it. And unfortunately, we take that into a Christian life, and we just kind of, try to deal with it that way. It's not healthy. It's not healthy.
Not at all.
Now, when you touched on something, Robert, you said that we punish people for being fearful, for being human. How at least Bill and Robert, you can jump on this question. This isn't directed at anybody. And to you who are watching us right now, just in the comments, how have you seen us as a people of faith, as Christians, treat people that are vulnerable, that admit, you know what, I am afraid? I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I would say sometimes when you hear the words that Brother Bill just said, is that we as Christians want to say that we're perfect, that everything in our family is perfect. And if anybody lets on for even the instant that that's not true, then we look down on that person. And that is a form of punishment, really. And it's a form of dishonesty, too, because it's telling something that's not true about your family, right? Your family's not perfect. You're feeling fears. Why punish somebody else for something that you yourself are dealing with? I think if we have a person who has a fear and it's obvious from their behaviors that they're not coping well with it, our approach really needs to be, how can I help this person cope better, because sometimes I can deal with some things, maybe something that you haven't experienced yet, and I can help you with it. It doesn't do any good to punish a person, to make them feel down about life's anxieties, life's fears.
Yeah, I would agree with Robert. Many times when we get together for church and we have our greeting, we all have our standard little sayings. Well, hi, Robert, how are you? Too blessed to be stressed, right?
Yeah. Cliche central.
And you're exactly right. They are cliches. And I can remember when I attended the church in Jellicoe, a pastor there did just an incredible sermon on this whole thing of, we come into church and we're in our finest Sabbath clothes and we are perfect little Christians. And then all of a sudden he took his jacket off and his shirt was ripped to shreds. It was covered in blood. It was covered in paint. It was covered in just darkness of what we couldn't see until he took his jacket off. And I think in many situations, we've got to be more like that in the church, of making it safe for someone to say, I'm not having a good day or a good week, rather than coming in with this falsehood, as what Robert said, of saying, I'm okay.
Yeah. And it almost seems to be our standard response, that I'm okay, when we're really not. I'd like to share a comment that was shared on YouTube for our discussion. Tim shared on YouTube. He said, I think it goes back to our conversation about feelings and the preconceived notion that Christians are not supposed to have feelings.
Ooh.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, that's a good one, right? That's a good one. Well, I think some of it is our culture, right? Sometimes we debate in our church about how much of our feelings should be exposed during church. And our culture says, hey, keep it all bottled up inside, not just the bad stuff, but even some of the good stuff. I mean, in our church, for instance, I kind of rib some of our members, because if something really is exciting about Jesus, you won't ever hear them say anything. I mean, their amen is like, amen, like they're almost. And I think it's the opposite side of this same coin that says, hey, when something's good happening, I'm not going to let you know. But if something bad is really happening, you're never going to know about it. You could read about it, but you're never going to know it from me.
Right.
Yeah, and I think Robert is exactly right. As Adventists, we're big proponents in health until it comes to mental health. And then it's kind of like, no, not going to go there. And here's part of the problem that is, all three of us, as well as the people listening, know that when you keep those negative emotions bottled up inside, after a while, they're going to come out sideways.
Yeah.
And they're going to come out in the situation of high blood pressure, cardiac disease, pulmonary disease. And so we're missing an important part of our ministry when we say the health message is so very important, when we're leaving that part of it out.
And it's really kind of a wickedness for us to tell people not to be human, to shut off a part of yourself that's you can't really shut off, right? It seems so uncaring to do that. People come to the church for a place of safety, and wouldn't it be nice if we could say to them, bring your whole self to that place.
Yeah.
Don't leave something at home.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. It's like you mentioned earlier, it's